Good morning and welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your break. So now we'll go into the legislative updates with Michael Britt, who is the Texas Workforce Commission Director of Governmental Relations. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michael. Michael?
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. As Muriel mentioned, I'm Michael Britt. I'm the Director of Governmental Relations at the Texas Workforce Commission. And I was going to take a few minutes and give everyone an update on where we are, both actions at the federal level and then what we are seeing upcoming for the 87th Texas legislative session. Federally, actually, today is a big day. Current federal funding expires at midnight tonight. And congressional leaders have been working to pass a 1-week continuing resolution for funding to give them extra time to work out details of a larger omnibus funding bill that would fund the federal government through the end of this current fiscal year. Congressional leaders have been saying publicly that they would like to include the next round of COVID-19 relief with the omnibus spending package. Congressional leaders are still working on an agreement as to what would be included both in the omnibus funding bill and potential COVID-19 relief. And there have been reports over the last week or 10 days of several different frameworks, if you will, of COVID-19 relief legislation. And while those have been put out there, there have not been any agreements announced or released or any legislative language. We have heard that the next round of COVID-19 relief legislation could include things such as an extension of the federally funded unemployment insurance benefits that have been passed under the CARES Act. Also, potentially additional funding for the payroll protection program, increased funding for childcare, as well as investments in transportation like airlines, airports, Amtrak, those type items. But again, I do want to stress that at this point, these are just things that have been proposed. There have not been any official agreements or even legislative language of potential COVID-19 legislation put forward. Also, kind of complicating things on the federal funding side. The U.S. House passed the continuing resolution yesterday, and the Senate is supposed to do that today. What has popped up this morning is that there are some senators that are at the moment blocking the continuing resolution. So there is now a possibility in true 2020 fashion that we could have a government shutdown at midnight tonight. Again, we've still got about another 12 hours to see what the Senate will do, but we are watching that very closely now because whereas before this continuing resolution was expected to pass right through and give Congress another week to work on federal government funding, we now this morning have the potential that we could see a government shutdown at midnight tonight. And we would just have to kind of wait and see what happens there. Switching gears to the upcoming 87th Texas legislative session, kind of starting with what session will look like, and the simple answer there is we're not quite sure yet. Obviously, as the legislative leaders contemplate a legislative session in keeping in mind COVID-19 and COVID-19 protocols, there's a lot of unknowns going into the next session, and there will definitely be a lot of changes. First and foremost, we're going to have a new Speaker of the House, Representative Dade Phelan from the Beaumont area, is the presumptive new Speaker of the Texas House. So first and foremost, with a new Speaker of the House, we could see changes in House committee chairs, as well as the jurisdiction of each of the committees. As I kind of mentioned at the beginning, the biggest question we have going into the next session is what exactly session will look like. And like I said, the short answer is we don't know. for any of you that pay attention to the news, I know there's been reports kind of leaking out about possibilities as to what the session could look like, but nothing official in terms of protocols or schedules have been announced by either house. We're still waiting to see how the legislative committees will conduct their work, or even how often they'll meet. There have been rumors that the committees may only meet every other week, at least for the first 2 months of session, and then kind of seeing what happens with COVID-19 numbers and also vaccine distribution, for them to reassess somewhere around the March-April time frame. One thing that these discussions have brought to the forefront is the very real possibility that there will be a reduced workload in the legislative committees on both the House and the Senate side. If they are meeting less frequently, that will mean less legislation, fewer bills that can pass through the committees. And so all of this is just adding up to a very uncertain start to this session. And in fact, many members we've seen have even yet to file bills for the legislative session. And what we're hearing is that is because they're waiting to see what the protocols are, and to see if they're, to gauge their legislative packages and workloads based on what they expect the committee workloads to be. And so, like I said, we're continuing to keep eyes on this. And we know that both on the House and Senate side, the leadership is working on that and working with the membership. But right now we just don't have a lot of answers, and likely won't until we get to either right before session or in the first couple of days. All that, with all of that being said, obviously this is also going to be a very tough budget year for the Texas legislature. The economic impact of COVID-19, as well as the downturn in the price of oil and gas, have certainly had effects on the Texas economy. As part of the budget situation, all state agencies were required to submit their legislative appropriations request with a 5% reduction in GR funding. For TWC, this required us to achieve a 20.1 million baseline appropriations reduction. And included in that reduction was a $2.4 million reduction in the requested funding for the Skills Development Fund. Given TWC's budget being 84% federal funding, our options for general revenue reductions were quite limited. That obviously was not the only reduction, but obviously an important one. And also an important note that TWC did decide we are not seeking any exceptional items to request the restoration of our proposed budget reductions that we use to achieve the 5% baseline reduction. And this, I also kind of want to highlight with the budget issue that, given the budget constraints this year, one thing we will be keeping an eye on is that the Skills Development Fund in general will certainly be looked upon as a source of general revenue for a lot of priorities. With the state looking to recover economically from the pandemic, there is already a lot of interest and a lot of discussion around workforce training, and it is likely that there will be legislation to either expand the use of the Skills Development Fund, or to make other changes to utilize that funding for those workforce training initiatives that are brought forward by the legislators. At the moment, there haven't been any bills filed to do this, but this is one of the issues that we will be watching closely during the session, as I mentioned, because with the discussion around workforce training, that seems a likely strategy for legislation. Regarding the JET program, that's another one that we think will probably be looked upon for expansion to help bolster the focus on workforce training and the recovery from COVID-19. At the moment, there has been one bill filed that would expand the use of the JET program, and that's House Bill 618 by Representative Harold Dutton out of Houston. And what that bill would do would be to add open enrollment charter schools to the list of eligible grantees under the JET program. At this point, that kind of concludes my update. Like I said, there's very much more that we don't know than what we do know going into the next session. And so at this point, I would go ahead and open it up if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask, and I will do my best to answer those.
Oh, Mario, you're muted.
Would help to unmute. As I was saying, thank you so much, Michael, for providing that update for us. You mentioned the general revenue funding, JR funding, and skills development. And are there other TWC programs that are funded through that funding source?
I'm sorry, funded through the skills development program or
Through general revenue?
The skills development program and the JET program are our two programs that are solely funded by general revenue. The vast majority of the remainder of our general revenue funding is match and maintenance of effort to draw down federal funds. And so that's why when it comes to the budget reductions, that those programs, unfortunately, become into that conversation, because there's only so many places that TWC with the degree of federal funding we have that we have to get general revenue from.
Okay. And is there a consideration to the use of skill development for high school at-risk non-CTE students not going to college?
We have seen legislation, to that. There was a bill similar to that last session. Like I said, at the moment, there hasn't been any legislation like that proposed, but I would say I think we'll probably see it coming. Like I said, a lot of members have yet to even file a single bill because they're quite honestly waiting to see how many bills they can realistically see passed. And so I think, for a lot of these members, the bills may be waiting to be filed, but we just haven't seen them yet. I can tell you, I haven't heard of any legislation yet, but specific. But I would say I think that and others, likely stuff that are being discussed right now. We're just waiting to see what actually gets filed.
Okay. And there is another question. It says, have committee assignments been made?
Sure. So the short answer is no. How committee assignments work in the House is that once the House convenes I failed to mention this. The legislature convenes on Tuesday, January the 12th at noon. When the House convenes on the 12th, they will first elect the speaker, and then they will debate the rules, and they will establish the committees that they have. And like I said, we could see some changes, both in committee jurisdiction, or even, they may constitute new committees. Once that happens, the speaker generally gives the House members about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, to submit what preference cards on the committees they would like to serve on, and then the speaker will make those assignments. Typically, we see committee assignments happen anywhere between the last week of January at the earliest, and then the beginning to middle of February at the latest. On the Senate side, things are a little more known because the entire Senate was not up for election, and the Lieutenant Governor obviously is carrying over, and he has that power in the Senate. The Senate committees generally won't change much. The Lieutenant Governor will make a few tweaks here and there, typically, to set the committee membership among the existing members, and then come January 12th, when the new senators are sworn in, they will then be assigned to committees by the Lieutenant Governor. So from the Senate standpoint, those committees are pretty much set, except for the members who are departing the Senate and the new ones coming in. But for the House, we won't know who those members are till, like I said, end of January, middle of February.
Okay. And then going back a little bit, you did talk about the possibility of a government shutdown. What would that look like for TWC programs that are funded through federal funds?
So, typically when there is a short-term federal government shutdown, the way this tends to operate is, with the balances we draw down, we're generally pretty good for short term. It's really the long-term shutdowns that could potentially have problems. And I will say that in terms of discussions around this, I mean, this really is kind of a late breaking development as of started about 8 o'clock this morning. So it wasn't something that had been discussed, for this particular instance before that, because as I mentioned, it seemed Congress was well on the road to passing the short-term continuing resolution to get to the larger budget agreement. But the agency does have protocols in place for this. I mean, this isn't the first time. As many of you know, this isn't the first time we've had a government shutdown, especially not even in the last few years. And so, we do have processes in place to use the existing balances to keep programs operational until government funding gets worked out. And like I said, I wish I had more to give on this scenario. It like I said, it just popped up. But a government shutdown could be as short as over the weekend, where it really doesn't matter, or could last a little longer if an agreement has failed to be reached on the short-term resolution. Then they may just continue with their negotiations on the longer-term funding, and then just have a shutdown until that happens. But there's also still the possibility that these issues get resolved and the continuing resolution be passed by midnight, in which case we would not have the government shutdown.
Okay, great. Good to hear. I do have four more questions. The next one is, during this legislative process or the sessions, is there any way that the community can assist or be involved either before, during, or after the legislative sessions take place?
Sure. So during the session, that involvement, obviously one of the most direct ways anyone can be involved is providing input to their legislators, either through direct outreach or testifying on legislation of interest to them. I would offer a caveat there, in that one of the things being discussed by leadership of both chambers is exactly how public input will be received this session. For any of you that have participated in a legislative hearing or been to the Capitol during a legislative session, the Capitol is a quite crowded place during session. And with COVID-19, that is one of the things they're looking to address, is how do they allow public participation while maintaining health safety. And so, we're really not sure yet what that will look like. There have been rumors, and they are only rumors, that if the public is going to testify, they may have to have a COVID test or the vaccine, or they may have to do it, via video through one spot in the Capitol. I mean, we really don't know. We have had assurances, there have been statements that the public will be able to continue to provide input, because that is, a major part of the legislative process. But exactly how that will look, we don't know. One thing that does seem to be emerging is clear is that what we consider the lobby days, the association days, or the county days, where groups would come in and have big events at the Capitol, likely will not be allowed this session due to COVID-19 restrictions. So, this really is going to, this is going to be uncharted territory for everybody. But I would say, if you are tracking issues that, you have interest in and want to provide input, providing that to your elected officials is always the best route. Just the manner in which that feedback is provided this session will probably will be different than we have in previous sessions.
Great, thank you. So one last question. If there is some legislation that is going to impact TWC and there's concern about it, would a community member contact you or someone within your department?
Certainly, I would say if anybody has concerns, one thing I have to caveat is that as a state agency, as government employees, myself, my staff, and everybody who works for TWC, we cannot advocate for or against any piece of legislation. We have to, as we say, we educate, we don't advocate. So when we are providing as the agency information to the legislators, legislators, excuse me, we always provide information as to the cause and effect of a particular piece of legislation. If, for any feedback that would fall into the category of advocacy, we cannot participate in that as government employees. And so I would encourage anyone that, if you have feedback of that type, either through any of the associations you work with or reach out to the legislators directly, because private citizens certainly have the, in private business, things like that certainly have the ability and the right to advocate for or against, but we can't as the agency. So I just always like to add that caveat to our activities, just so that everybody, always understands kind of the position that we are coming from as TWC.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. We appreciate you coming in and giving us these updates. Is there any last items you'd like to add?
No, that's all I have, and thank you all very much for your time and attention. And as you mentioned, always, if there's ever anything I can do or ever any information I can provide, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact me.
Great, Michael. Thank you so much. Thank
you
for joining us. Please come back for our next session. After the break will be AEL, so Adult Education and Literacy, Speeding Pathways to Careers, and that will be at noon. So please join us. Mahalia Baldini, who is the director of AEL, will be the moderator for that session. We'll see you after the break. Thanks.